Thanks for joining. Today, our last DFW SEM, um, and we have been celebrating in marketing. This would not be possible with members, our treasurer, Bart Peters, our VP of Data Search and Hospitality, fantastic conference, Chris O'Connor, registration, Kevin Adams, our VP of Sponsor, our VP of Communications, Casey, who these virtual events run smoothly, and our Tim Shane. We have a great opportunity for you. We have auditions, and this is a great way to boost your, grow your network even wider, and then marketing community. I know whenever I join the get back to an organization that it helped me boost. So if y'all want to join, email info for more information. Memberships that you can attend these meetings for free. Data search in the future. And email info at DFWSEM and our job board. Let us know what you think at the end of this by filling out our virtual. But with that, I will pass it over to Speaker Robert Riggs.
Well, hi there. I'm Robert Riggs, and it's kind of like old home week. I remember starting with this group around 2010, kind of getting coming out of journalism and getting my feet wet with SEO and everything. But it's great to see old friends here tonight. I'm going to talk about a podcast that I've launched called True Crime Reporter. I have to say there were people in this group and others that used to urge me to do this. Gary Leland, everybody knows Gary. Gary was always kind of on my butt about, you ought to do this podcast. And we all know Gary had a bunch of successful podcasts, one of the early ones on girls softball, and I think he made a fortune out of it, but he really broke ground, started podcast movement. So finally, I took Gary up on it and decided to, as I said, open up my old reporter's notebooks from when I was reporting and do true crime stories. And so we started that at the maybe the worst time or best time. It was the pandemic. And the great thing is that, people were sitting home and needed content. I think a lot of people in the industry thought, oh boy, this is going to be a disaster. But it turned out that there was a huge demand. So that ended up by the sixth episode of a 17-part series on a serial killer. We ended up with a TV deal where I'm an executive producer and did a co-production. I'm going to walk kind of everybody through the making of this and where it's come. But it premiered on Fox Nation streaming in March, so I'm going to show you the trailer here first. Everybody thinks Cole Murray was the last night in the case. This guy is a sexually sadistic serial killer. He's a natural predator. He was on the hunt all the time. McDuff became known as the bird state killer. He's snatching, taking, abducting prey when all the chances. This was even beyond anything any of us could comprehend. McDuff's the convicted murderer who in 1966 was sentenced to die in the Texas electric chair. The death penalty, something's wrong here. Who would ever imagine that anyone would ever release this man from prison? The corruption was so deep in the world system. Tell us how this monster got out of prison. So this was quite a transition for me to podcasting. In broadcasting, this is a shot of me and the crew in Iraq at the start of the war, and I used to call our gear and everything the 600-pound pencil. My colleagues that were print reporters just had their reporters' notebooks and pens, but we always had to lug all of this stuff around. And what really attracted me to podcasting was that it's so easy and it's portable. You can go, I did the podcast sitting in people's kitchens just with good high quality equipment. So one of the things I really like it is that it's intimate for the listener. You're literally you get in their head. It's not as cumbersome as all that TV equipment, and it's quick. It's much easier to do. You don't have video issues. It's all that editing of video. So I really like doing it. However, it's thrown me over into television, back into TV. Before I launched off on it, uh, I did a lot of research about what is the potential audience for true crime. Who is it? Who are the listeners? Because I was bootstrapping, it was my money, and I didn't want to make a big mistake. And I found academic studies and everything I could to try to understand my audience, by the way, is 80% female, typically 25 to 54 demographic, skews older than that. But, what was it? And the one thing I found was that serial killers, everybody loves serial killers. And I handy keywords and, I, I thought, well, maybe true crime. Maybe that's because we were also building a website and wanted to make sure I employed all of this. And no, it wasn't true crime. The the keyword was serial killer. And I can even see now if in titles of episodes, if I've got serial killer in there, it's going to get the listen, it's going to get the click. And then the mother of all true crime keywords. Anybody want to take a guess? The mother of all keywords. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy. It's unbelievable. You put Bundy in, and one of my dear friends, a former investigative reporter, he's the guy that wrote the book on Bundy. I always accuse him of you started the Bundy industry, but after Bundy was arrested, was in prison awaiting trial, he got into prison and did interviews with Bundy. He got over 150 hours of interviews and wrote the book. He and another investigative reporter, which is, been sitting in shelves for years and everything else. And then in 2019 did a deal with Netflix. He found all of his old audio tapes of his interview with Bundy of 150 hours or more, and they turned it into the Bundy tapes on Netflix. And I was asking him, I said, well, did you make a lot of money off the TV show? And he, well, not really once I paid my agent and stuff. And it wasn't a big fortune, but he said it set my book sales on fire again around the world. It's kind of interesting how that kind of long tail and stuff. But I mean, just here's a sample of just, how we're looking. Now, the other thing I did, I wrote a business plan, a monetization plan about, how are we going to make money on this? Uh, how does podcast advertising pay? It pays on CPM or, per thousand downloads. But at the bottom was TV. I did have TV in the mind, but I did not imagine that it suddenly would boom, take. So it surprised me. I was a novice. I love these guys. If anybody is thinking about launching a podcast, boy, these are the guys to go with. Partly, I love them. They're all vets, and me with my background covering wars and having gone to A&M, we all kind of speak the same language, but they really know the technical. And Todd Cochran, he's in the Podcasting Hall of Fame. He's got one of the early podcasts called Geek Central, which I suggest you listen to. But I'm just kind of giving them a plug. I still, even today, I want to know something about ads or something. And I call these guys. They're just a wealth of information, and they share. So our podcast is about this guy, the serial killer, Kenneth McDuff, absolutely a notorious murderer who 30 years ago, as an investigative reporter, I discovered he'd gotten out of prison under a cloud of corruption, along with many, many other former death row inmates had been turned loose. And the day after he walked out of prison, he started murdering again. And he abducted women up and down Interstate 35 and out into East Texas and all. We'll never know how many victims he had, but I was covering the Senate, and that's in the center there was a trial lawyer, Ted Lyon. Ted was the chairman of the Criminal Justice Committee, and he and I were both kind of suspicious about what is going on. How are these people getting out? Parole board would give excuses, and we really started digging, and it ended up in a huge expose, hearings coming out of my story. It was very lonely for a while. No one for months would pick up my story. Nobody, because I was saying all of these top government officials in Texas, they were all crooks. They'd done a great job of fooling the public and fooling the press. I had members of the press come around to me and say, Robert, we know you're new here at the Capitol. I've been in Washington, D.C. covering the White House, but you just got it wrong. We think you got it wrong. We like this guy, these guys, these are, these guys were Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde on the parole board. They had other life, but you see the era that pointing, there's me. And the hearings were so big. This was such a big scandal. You can see the back of Ann Richards' gray hair there. And she had come into office and inherited this scandal. It had taken place under the previous administrations. So that took me for a number of years into every maximum security prison in the state of Texas. And I really learned what was going on and how to talk to inmates and everything else. This is me at the old death row unit. Death row's been moved now. There was an escape from death row in about 95, 96, and they moved it to a really supermax unit. But for me as a reporter, the prison system and that world of criminals and criminal, it's just another culture that we don't see. And I think that's part of the fascination of true crime, is that it's something you you don't see, you're not exposed to, and you're curious. You know, it's like I'm in a maximum security unit, and I said to the guy, he killed like 8 people. Why'd you do it? Well, they were home. Really, they were home. Okay, they were all home. So, um, so I did my first interview with these two in November 12th, 2019. Uh, on the left is a sheriff. He'd retired, but on the right, though, is Parnell McNamara. Parnell McNamara today is the sheriff of McLennan County. He is a throwback to the Old West. He is quite a character, but he previously was a U.S. Marshal. His family had been U.S. Marshals since the turn of the century. And if you walk into his offices, you can kind of see it in the background there. You think you're in Dodge City. You're waiting for Masterson or Mr. Dillon to walk out, and it such an interesting world. And there he is with Tommy guns and stuff. But first did the first interview with them, got it in the can to start to work. And fortunately, I got all of my interviews done before the pandemic hit. I'd gotten all of those done, so there were no restrictions on travel. And then March, COVID hit, and I was bootstrapping this, still kind of am bootstrapping it. And I was doing consulting work for personal injury lawyers, really high end firms, helping them prepare their opens to juries, the closing arguments to juries, uh, day in the life videos of victims, mediation videos and stuff. And boom. And I was also writing for the executive team of Morgan Stanley, and I lost all of that business in 1 week, gone. And the courthouse is shut down. So it was a scary time. You kind of wonder how are we going to pay the mortgage here? But I had plenty of time on my hands to go to work and writing the podcast and editing it. Uh, and one of the things that I did do is, for anything you're doing, your network is so important to you. And I had a large network on LinkedIn. So I posted on LinkedIn. My page didn't look like that then. This is more updated stuff from the TV show. But I updated the page to say I'd launched the podcast. And that brought me a lot of connections to people in law enforcement. Like most of the Texas Rangers in the state connected with me. And these are all sources for stories. And I had a long working relationship with them, and fortunately was respected by them over the years. So that brought them in. But the other thing that happened here, I had people that knew me from television but didn't know me contact me about the podcast, and what are you doing with it, and that led to international production company contacting me, and they I'd put up an intro, and then months later I got the first episode up. But when they came in, whoops, I had the sixth episode up, and the president of the company called me, and he had listened to it, and he'd said to me, he said, people are always coming here, hey, listen to this, listen to that, and it's bullshit, but wow, this is something. And he started asking me questions about specific things in the episode. And I thought, okay, he's really in and he's hooked. And the one thing I did like about the podcast is that for television or anything else, you can hear the characters. You can hear how their voices sound, what their personalities are like, and you can get a sense of the story arc. And, in many of these things, there'll be one overarching story arc and other stories under it, in between. So that really helped sell it. And this is the company, Big Media, that we did a deal with. And this is the young developer there who came as well. I'm going to let him talk about what, for anybody out there that's got a dream of a TV series, he's describing what it takes. Oh, your audio okay? Oh, all right. Let me just move on. So the other nice thing that happened is that I won a Webby Award for true crime, and Webby's the big thing in the podcast deal. And my company was Dateline and BBC, so it was the three of us, and everybody was saying, "Well, gee, how big is your studio? How many people do you have?" You know, and yeah, I didn't have the heart to tell them, "Well, it's me and a freelancer," and it's kind of and kind of really still that way today. Is we're sort of like the Wizard of Oz. You pull back the curtain and the steam and all that sort of stuff. But what I did, I applied the craft of what I learned in journalism about how to be efficient and produce. And then I've learned so much through DFW SEM and the stuff we've done over the years. So when you do set out to do these shows this way, this happened. This is a sample. It's called a pitch deck. I don't, if you're doing a reality show, you're doing a travel show, anything, everybody starts with a pitch deck. I had a bit of advantage with the podcast because they could hear it. Pitch decks, people are kind of looking and they're like, they have to use their imagination, which a lot of people aren't good at using. But with the podcast, that really helped. And so a pitch deck is that you're laying out the story right down to the episodes. This changes when you get into a production, but trying to get one of the channels to understand it. The channels have people that are commissioners. They'll commission the production of something, and so we reached a co-production deal. The company that I ended up working with, and it sort of spells out what Robert gets, what they get, our working relationship, and then they've been in the industry for 30 years. They've got all the contacts. They can go sell it to Netflix and others. I don't have those contacts. What I do have, and what we've realized we have, is we have access to stories. And the access to the people is incredibly important. That's gold. Most of them don't have it. Many of them, because they're in Hollywood, they kind of don't know. They certainly don't know how to talk to cops. They really don't get it. So I ended up, as part of the deal, I wanted to maintain creative control. That's a challenge, a difficult thing to do. But I made sure I was in the chair asking all of the questions. So by the path I took with questions, and that I'm setting the story arc right there with the questions, and you can't really deviate from it. There, okay, everybody, that's what we've got to work with. So that was Bob Schieffer, anchor from CBS. Bob is originally from Fort Worth. Some of you may remember host of Face the Nation. He also was for a while was the anchor of CBS Evening News. Small world. Back when I worked in Congress as a staffer on a committee and I became interested in going to television, it was Bob who helped me get on TV. And so all these years later, I'm going through archives about Kenneth McDuff's early murders in the 60s, and I'm in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram archives over at the UTA Arlington Library. And suddenly, the lead reporter is Bob Schieffer. And I'm like, oh my God. He's got the bylines, but he's the first guy. He's got kind of an interview with McDuff and all. And I call him. And of course, I'd been away from Washington a long time. I hadn't talked to him a long time. And I tell him, what I'm doing. He goes, my God, they let that monster out of prison? Yeah, Bob. And he said, I'll do it. I want to do an interview with you about it. And it's one of the best interviews in the whole television series. The other thing, and of course, I was used to this in journalism. You work with a team. There's a big team behind the camera with you and everything. Same on this. And I even though, I used to be a guest correspondent for Ted Koppel on uh, Nightline and other things like that. Those are really involved productions. But when you go to streaming television and HD and all that sort of stuff, it's all, and the budget, I mean, the budget for our thing was almost $2 million for 5 episodes. Now, that didn't go in Robert's pocket. It's got to go on the screen. They will come audit you. They want to, they have certain standards how the money's got to be spent. So, but uh, I came together with a really experienced showrunner and executive producer. And the showrunner, if you guys have heard that term around, the showrunner is the traffic cop in the middle. He's the liaison between me and the crew and the editors and the network and the other production company. It's a very difficult job. Plus, he's having to keep it on budget. And even with all my experience, I would have been underwater quick, because you really have got to. And he directed huge productions. If you've ever been to Gettysburg, in the visitor center, there's that huge panorama reenactment, and he directed that whole thing. And it's involved using, live charged ammunition and stuff. So I was really, and we all had such a good experience. We've kind of formed our own company together now to work together on other projects. So this is us out on a shoot. There's more people behind the camera here, but this is a 1985 Thunderbird, identical to the car that Kenneth McDuff used for abductions. And it was, when you start off in this, you sit down together, particularly Seth and I, about the story, our vision for the story. And I had two visions. One, I did not want the TV show, to look like 48 Hours or Dateline. They're very formula. They have what I call flat lighting, and I was like, no, I want to do this so it looks like a movie. We're going to kind of do the first true crime piece that looks like a movie. There's one other out there on Netflix, was the Zodiac Killer, that was done that way, really effective. And the second thing was, I want to find his car, a car identical to his, and we're going to make it a character in here, and it'll relieve us of the need for reenactments and stuff like that. So I actually found that car in Ohio, original owner, bought it, brought it down here. It was a kind of a metal flake gold, and I found the right original paint code. And a friend of mine's got a body shop, and we painted it. And we put it on the road on the same places McDuff would hunt victims on the interstate and off the interstate in Central Texas. But we do it at night with a drone over it. And the drone, and I'll show you the drone in a minute, the drone brings this whole, point of view that is spooky. It's just spooky. It reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock and what was the movie, The Birds? And you're looking down, like the view of the bird, Well, that's what we did with it, and it really did work. If anybody would like to buy a 1985 Thunderbird, it's in my driveway. We're getting ready to sell it. So I ended up being, our storytelling style is we're going to let all the interviews tell the story. It's a hard way to do it. So you really better have your questions so that you're getting everything, because you're going to come back with a jigsaw puzzle and put this together. But you still have to stitch it together. And so I'm the guy that sort of stitches all that together episode to episode. But it's not broadcast anymore. It's not look in the camera. I'm driving down the highway, all these cameras on me, but I'm driving. I'm not looking at the camera. I'm talking. And you, the viewer, are in the car with me. It's like we're having a conversation, and it's not, you don't project your voice and stuff, and you don't project your voice in the podcasting either. I had to make an adjustment because on TV, you're sitting home and it's a passive audience, and you really project. You'll hear the guys that do sports, they really project. And it's just the nature of the medium. On podcasting, I'm in your head. I mean, if I start blasting at you and all of that sort of stuff, that's not going to work. So, I said we'd had that 800-pound pencil. Well, we got it again. So here's a little clip of Our drone, we used drone operator. Of course, he had an FAA license, does all kinds of stuff. But we're going to show you a scene we shot where I'm walking across the field, basically talking to you, the viewers, without really looking at you. And then we'll show you what it looks like in the show. High def, 5D camera and all. There's a showrunner, producer. In a minute, we'll cut to what it looks like in the TV show. While McDowell languishes in prison, the nightmare for his victims' families continues. By 1998, 7 years after Regina Moore, Brenda Thompson, and Colleen Reed were murdered, their bodies have still not been found. So that was an area that he had taken bodies and what have you, and so we go back to that area. But did you notice how the color changed and all? Well, so on these shows, and because it's everybody's got the big screen in there, you do color correction, and literally there's a team that does almost every frame, setting colors. And so we wanted that more night looking effect, and so you can see how that works. It changes
Yeah, it
there.
made it creepy.
Oh yeah, well
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said creepy because that's what we're going for.
Well, it made it creepy for me.
So show's out. It won a Telly Award 2 months out. We were really happy about that. Now there's McDuff in civilian clothes, and usually on these serial killers you see the mug shots and the after they've been caught. They look so scary and everything else. But the scary thing about them is they look just like us. They look very, very normal. They can be standing behind you at the gas station and other stuff. And that's kind of how they get close to people as well. And, one of the things I do for the podcast, and I really do it for TV, I get the original case files, and I get everything out of them, every crime scene photo, everything, copy them. And they're available under open records, or if you know the detectives, you get them, because I use them on the website. I use them in the web copy. If somebody comes to my site to look at it, I want them to have that whole graphical interface and really pull them in. And we use them in social and stuff as well. They're key. They're critical to the TV thing. So, there's McDuff's driver's license. Another mugshot of him. He was caught, and these were ligatures that he would keep made to tie his victims up with, and was always carrying a group up around.
First time he was caught, or the second?
Second time. This we really wanted. Everybody, he was a huge man, over 6 feet, pumped iron in the prison system. I mean, he was a very large man. And what everybody remembered, he had huge, huge hands. And his hands were so large, he would grab his victims, which he preferred victim was petite, under 5 feet, but he would grab them one-handed by the throat and lift them off the ground and control them and put them in his vehicle and stuff. So we wanted to give a sense of that. So I wanted to make sure I got these and his handprint card. His hands were so big that when they got him, normal handcuffs wouldn't fit. They had to put leg irons on his wrist. Yeah. Yeah. How'd you like to run in a dark alley? Yeah. No, he was executed. This is a crime scene photograph. There was a young woman in Austin, Colleen Reed, right after Christmas. She's out washing her new car, and he was like a shark. Many of these guys are, and they cruise looking I mean, they cruise hundreds of miles at night, and they're looking for that one moment. And he literally circled that car wash. He had an accomplice, and boom, slipped in behind her, and people heard a blood chilling scream, and that was it. Never seen again. Never seen alive again. Her car's found. Some neighbors hear screams. They go over there, and this is what they found: the car's soap still dripping off her car. Later, uh, after he's arrested, they found her blood on his cowboy hat. There's his car, and you see why we want. And his trunk was full of stuff from his victims and other stuff as well. Um, this is him. Uh, he's been taken off of death row, and he's coming into the back door of the death house, the death chamber in Huntsville. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Huntsville unit. It's the oldest prison in the system, late 1800s. But the death chamber's in there. It's also a prison, but the death chamber is also in there. It was. It's also the place when you come into the system. It's first place you go, and when you leave the system on parole, you leave from there. But he left in a pine box made by inmates. Um, yeah, there it is. Everybody watches the clock for the. Usually, it's this. I think the law specifies it like the stroke of 6 p.m. that they start the lethal injection flowing. Um, Death chamber. I've been in there to do stories and stuff, not during the execution, but I've been all through it. They don't let anyone do that anymore. So, but we've done it. The mirrored area there on one side is the area where the victims' families can watch, and the other side is where the uh, convicted families can watch. Don't often see them in there, but typically what I never had the desire to witness an execution, and I've always been kind of ambivalent about them because there have been cases of wrongful convictions we have found through DNA. But I did always find from the families, I think a lot of people mistakenly believe it's they're out for revenge and all that stuff. What I found is that they wanted to know that the killer would not hurt anyone else like had happened to them. And it devastates their lives. And in the television show, we really, and I do some of it in the podcast, we really show the impact it has, not just the immediate family, but family members to come, or it changes everyone's life. Here's kind of a closing of the show.
It was a great satisfaction on my part to see the laws change. Actually, good came out of all of this suffering. McDuff was supposed to go back to Rosebud and be buried there. And when the word got out, there was an outcry in Rosebud. McDuff was taken by inmates to a prison cemetery nearby. An anonymous marker on the grave that only has his death row number. There are psychopaths among us. You really need a way to keep them behind bars to protect the rest of us. Because they prey on the innocent when they're free to kill.
So I have a studio behind my home. We converted a garage apartment that we had. And since the original podcast, the prosecutor, it was in that case, he's come into the podcast with me. He's no longer a U.S. prosecutor, he's an attorney, but we do this together. Sometimes we will do interviews of detectives and all. We will break cases down, the two of us, based on our experience. Sometimes there are cases we were both involved in. And then we do another, we do every 6 weeks or so, we do something called an extra. And those are really highly produced episodes with music, sound effects, interviews, my narration in and out. They're they're time consuming. We think they're very compelling. What's been sort of interesting is that um, for all that time and effort we put into those, sometimes our interviews just with the detectives get just as many listeners because they're kind of hearing how they do the case, how they, you're, as we say, you're inside the crime scene tape. So now we have our second show, television show coming where we start production on in January, and it involves the Texas Rangers. It came out of, we did 3 episodes about Texas Rangers, and we're working on a dedicated podcast now with Texas Ranger stories that's not out. But that's me out at the range with one of the Rangers. So that's what's coming. That's where you can find me. If you're a true crime fan, I appreciate you. Listen, download, tell us what you think. If you got friends, share it with them. And now, one of the big challenges that I have, and all the podcasters have, everybody talks about it, and I think people and other things today, is discovery. How do you get discovered? There is so much stuff. Even the television shows have a, they have a challenge. In our case, we built this show to be binge watching, and so we convinced Fox put them all 5 up at once, and they did a big, heavy promotional campaign. It was on Fox News. They had it on all the Fox stations. They had it on Fox Digital, and they put a big promotions effort about it. So that really helped. But today, I'm really trying to figure out other ways to ride other people's coattails. We all know who Rand Fishkin is, and Rand has this thing called Spark Toro now, which has been a very helpful tool to me. Where's my audience online? Where's an audience like mine? But Rand is really preaching, you got to find some people that have existing audiences and kind of become part of them. And in doing that, I did a distribution agreement with Southern Cross Austereo. It's a big entertainment company in Australia and New Zealand. And so we've done a deal there. So they distribute and promote the podcast there, and we split revenue. We geolocate advertising, so you won't hear Australian ads in the US and stuff. So that's one of the huge challenges to me and everybody else in podcasting. I know some of the people that have online courses and stuff are telling me that the subscription rate has dropped off. And I've seen that people are oversubscribed. When I launched the show, my followers on YouTube said, God, I'd love to see this, but I can't afford another subscription. I already have too many. So that's a challenge as well. And Netflix, they're coming out with another offering that'll have ads in it. And you're seeing Pluto and some of these others now that have ads because, and especially now with the economic downturn, there's a challenge. But any of you have ideas about how to partner with people that have audiences? One of the things I'm getting ready to do, there's a big Western store out of Houston. They've got a national reach, and we're going to do a swap arrangement where our promotional card they're going to put in every shopping bag, that everything they sell, and in turn we'll do a promo in the podcast for them. We touch their audience when we do Texas Ranger related stuff. And Texas for us is a huge sales point. You cannot go wrong with Texas. I've seen that, especially now. Taylor Sheridan and Yellowstone. If anybody's watching Yellowstone, and 1883, he's got the other one coming. That has set off internationally this desire for all things Western. I've talked to some of the apparel companies. It's the biggest phenomenon since Urban Cowboy with John Travolta, based on a country Western dance club I used to go to when I was a student at A&M called Gillies. And my partner, he's an Aggie too. He went there as well. He was actually a Bronco rider. So, we're trying to do that. I'm just starting off a thing to um, repurpose the podcast, and for all of you guys that are and gals that are content entrepreneurs. I got to looking at things and I thought, we spend all this time and effort, research, and it's just one shot. It's just podcast gone. So I was like, we've got to do something else with it. We're figuring out how to do short books um, that are, ladies can read at the beach, that sort of thing, quick reads. There's my idea about it. There was a phenomena in Victorian England called penny dreadfuls that were huge on true crime, sold on the streets of London for a penny. So we're trying that model, and I'm just starting off with a deal. I'm offering to. This is my test run. It's a weekly newspaper. They're very, very popular, and it's an affluent area and stuff. And so I'm going to do every 2 weeks a true crime column. That's really the print version article, the newspaper version article of one of our podcasts, and in turn, they promote the podcast. That because they already have an audience. It cost me a lot of money to try to go get their audience. So what I'm trying to do with some of the bigger networks that already have audiences. So that's that's the big. I think that's a big challenge for all of us doing anything today. Is that how do you get discovered? Because I don't think SEO even works. Like, well, I can't afford that. And I'm up against Amazon and those folks as well. And my God, they just pour money into promotions of their podcast on their channel. See,
I think there's ways, and I have a couple people that probably could help you that pop into my head.
yeah, well, we'll talk. But that's I'm just kind of bearing it all. That's the shadow out there. The podcast has really not made it into the black yet, but it's put us in the black for TV, which I never expected. My goal is I got to get the podcast into the black, thus trying to do the book things and other stuff like that. But I have a number of retiring out, like Texas Rangers contact me saying, could you write a book with me? That sort of stuff going on that we could also do podcast and TV out of. So, it's still a work in progress. I'm in like the top 5% of podcasts, but I still don't have those huge numbers. I'm not Joe Rogan. There's only a few Joe Rogans.
How many podcasts do you do a week or a month?
We try to do one a week.
1 week?
Yeah, weekly. It's hard. And sometimes we just have to take a break to work on the other things. But we try to keep it one a week. I just did a thing in New York City that I had to be there anyway, but I wanted to do. We're always trying to figure out a way to kind of press the boundary. So we've been doing stuff of the way we're mixing sound and layering sounds that will really kind of try to suck you in, And there's this legendary New York police detective up there. He's absolutely amazing story. And so I took him on the street. I took a little portable recorder with a great reporter's mic by Rode, great quality. And I wanted the street sounds of New York, the sirens blaring by and everything else. And we went to crime scenes, and there was this one crime scene that he'd had a shootout with two soldiers from the Bonanno crime family, and to tell that story. But I wanted out there, you hear it, and so it's a different approach. Now it's an expensive approach. There are other detectives, other parts of the country I'll interview, but we use an app that's really excellent called Zencastr. There's one called Riverside, but you don't want to use Zoom. Use these, you get top quality audio, you get top quality video. It's immediate, it's going into the cloud as you're doing it, so you don't lose everything. But I wanted to, and sometimes we go to location. Of course, that's expensive, gas and everything else. But and I do think you do get a little something on location. You know, they're comfortable. But then we have people coming into the studio too. I've got a police chief coming in on Monday. Will come to the studio, and that's nice because you really have such control over everything, your audio, and we video in the studio as well. And but you always want to kind of give your audience something. If I learned in TV, something new, something, bringing them something. But anybody wants to shoot me an email, robert@robertriggs.com. You got any ideas about exposure, getting discovered? Podcast Movement had their big international conference here in August downtown, and that's what everybody talks about, of trying to get discovered. And for those of you thinking about doing a podcast, you can look at Apple, and there are 5 million podcasts in there. The thing you need to know, there's something called pod fade, and many people give up. I've had an advantage because I'm out of journalism, and I used to be on the air every day or so. You had to learn the discipline of production, but so they quit. They're big celebrities. They just quit. They just cannot do it. So there are only about 460,000 shows that are really active, that are really putting up episodes on any kind of frequent basis. That's in the world. So um, I know Brian Clark, who's Mr. Blogger. You remember, the whole deal. Brian thinks blogging is dead, and he believes in podcast and stuff. So I do just like it as a medium to really connect. If your personality is important, it's a great place for people to kind of get to know you, feel like they know you. Kevin, you got a question?
Yeah. What happened to the accomplice? Did they find him?
Yeah, oh yeah. You got to watch the TV show. No, the accomplice was caught, and matter of fact, his confession is in the TV show. His confession's in the podcast as well. I do say something in that part of the podcast that this is not for the faint of heart. Don't have children in the room when you hear some of this stuff. So.
That was so interesting. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be back. Great to be back. Oh, and if there's a crime about, you'd like us to look at, do something on, let me know. Because I get great suggestions. I mean, I had a listener contact me, and we're going to do an episode about it. And it's like from the late 1800s, but his aunt was wrongly hanged, and the hanging didn't go well, and she basically choked to death for 20 minutes. Oh yeah. And what's been interesting? So if you look at London time period, Victorian era, they would have 30,000 people show up for a hanging. There were huge spectacles, and I've kind of learned this just in doing research. I'm trying to write a piece and do a thing about what is it that we like about true crime, and I started looking into that, and I was like, oh my God! I mean, it's just like, wow. There's always been that fascination there.
Yeah.
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 I understand.
But I do. It happens, especially for me on LinkedIn, as officers contacting me. Hey, I'm about to retire. Let's talk. They're locked down while they're working for the agency.
Sure.
Yeah, and we only do adjudicated cases because they're the liable proof, and it's all been settled and everything. I've done one thing thus far that was kind of breaking news, and it was such a good story, you just couldn't ignore it. And it's the love triangle murder in Austin with a cyclist, the off-road cyclist. I don't know if you've. Oh man, it's got every sensational thing you could think of true crime in it. Of a fugitives and murder and philandering and you name it. It's all in it. And they actually had a hearing today, and the Fox reporters were there. They call me. I'll be quoted in a piece tomorrow that they're writing for Fox Digital in their true crime segment. And even on Fox Digital, they do sports and entertainment and all that sort of stuff. They're but their true crime is the killer. I mean, it carries it all. They have like 5 true crime reporters, and it is, man, yeah. When I was up visiting with them, they had Netflix has come out with this Jeffrey Dahmer. Sir, anybody else? Have you seen it? Okay, you know who Jeffrey Dahmer is, though. Okay, well, so um, they saw it come out, and they went, "I bet that'll get an audience." So they'd done some Jeffrey Dahmer stories, so they rewrote their stories and they put some fresh interviews in it, and they published them the night it came out on Netflix. My God, they got tens of thousands of downloads, and it was so smart. They knew, and I'm stealing this from now on. They knew that suddenly there's going to be this whole new interest in Jeffrey Dahmer, and people are going to be looking. And because they're a news organization, they rank on the subject, and they cleaned up. It was a smart thing to do. And then, frankly, I had sat there going, Jeffrey Dahmer, isn't that old news? I mean, that's kind of like Bundy's old news,
Yeah,
you know?
got a new generation that's coming up that wants to learn about all this stuff.
That's it. Because I looked at my young adult kid and they were like, Dad, did you ever cover Jeffrey Dahmer? And I went, you didn't know who No. Oh my, it was a whole new, and I thought, okay, there's a whole new generation coming along that we've got to serve as well. And there are even some other, if I could get bigger, there are other crime areas. Ideally, I mean, I called it True Crime Reporter because I'm a reporter, and I knew there are these great police beat reporters out there that are no longer out there that much. And if I could my original deal was, I'm going to interview them. I'm going to have them on. And then I went off on law enforcement. I'm still going to come back. But ideally, what I'd like to do is I'd love to have 4 other reporters, and we're on every day. That'd be the objective on every day. And I do know that, in terms of advertising and the way that works, more your own, the more money you can make. But, I've even realized there's certain genres of crime. For instance, I had a young 22-year-old woman helping me with TikTok. And she was like, why aren't you doing rapper crime? And I went, rapper. And she started ticking off all the murders of the rappers and stuff going on and all. And I was like, oh my God, there's a whole nother audience there of the young people that love the rappers that we could do. She's just ticking off all their names, Little Tommy and all. I was like, yeah. Any other questions? I've kind of droned on here.
I'd love to see one like that. What was it? Was it a Schlitterbahn in outside of Texas? Like the owners tried to create their own super high water slide, and the kid's head gets ripped off. Um, that's
No,
do you guys remember that story?
no, that's gross. Thank you so much.